When I found out I was pregnant, my heart overflowed with joy. My husband Mark and I had been trying for years, and after countless prayers, God had finally answered us. The thought of holding a baby, of becoming a mother, felt like the fulfillment of a long-awaited promise. As the months passed, we prepared with excitement. We decorated the nursery, stocked up on baby books, and imagined our future as a family of 3. Everything seemed perfect, until the day of our 20-week ultrasound. I remember sitting in the dimly lit room, holding Mark's hand as the technician moved the probe over my belly. It should have been a moment of joy, but the technician's expression changed, and she fell silent. My heart sank. The doctor came in shortly after. He gently explained that our baby, a boy, had been diagnosed with Down syndrome. I stared at him in disbelief. This wasn't the future I had imagined. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My mind raced with questions. What would his life be like? What would our lives be like? When we got home that day, I sat in the nursery and wept. I cried out to God, "Why, Lord? Why is this happening? How will I ever be enough for this child?" I felt so unprepared, so overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. But in the stillness of that moment, I felt a whisper in my heart. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. Those words washed over me like a balm. I didn't know how I would get through this, but I knew that somehow God's grace would carry me. As the months progressed, I slowly came to terms with the reality of our situation. I researched Down syndrome, joined support groups, and began to prepare for the unique challenges we would face as parents of a child with special needs. But deep down, the fear still lingered. Then came the day of Joshua's birth. The moment they placed him in my arms, everything changed. His little eyes looked up at me, and in that instant, I was overcome with love. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult, but this was my son, the child God had entrusted to me. I remembered Psalm 139:14. "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Joshua was no mistake. He was wonderfully made, created with purpose by the hands of our loving God. But the fear didn't disappear overnight. As we settled into life with a newborn, there were countless sleepless nights, doctor's appointments, and moments when I felt utterly overwhelmed. I remember one particularly difficult day when Joshua, who had several medical complications, was inconsolable. Nothing I did seemed to help. I felt helpless, exhausted, and emotionally drained. That night, after I finally got Joshua to sleep, I collapsed on my bed and wept. In my brokenness, I prayed, "God, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." And once again his words came to me. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and he helps me." Psalm 28:7. I didn't need to rely on my own strength. God was my shield, and in him I would find the strength I needed. As Joshua grew, the challenges became more complex. He had developmental delays, and every milestone, from rolling over to sitting up, took longer to achieve than with other children. Sometimes I would watch other mothers with their typically developing babies and feel a pang of jealousy. I knew I wasn't supposed to compare, but it was hard not to wonder why our journey had to be so difficult. One day, during a particularly tough therapy session, I broke down in tears. I felt so isolated, like no one understood what I was going through. But just as I was feeling completely alone, a woman from our church reached out to me. She, too, had a child with special needs, and she offered to meet up for coffee. That conversation changed everything. She listened to my fears and frustrations, and for the first time, I felt seen. Through her, God reminded me of Ecclesiastes 4:9-10. "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up." I realized that I wasn't meant to carry this burden alone. God was providing me with a community of believers to lean on, to walk alongside me in this journey. We started meeting regularly, a small group of mothers with children who had special needs. We prayed together, shared our struggles, and encouraged one another with God's word. In that group, I found not only friendship, but also a deeper understanding of God's love and faithfulness. It was through their prayers and support that I began to see Joshua's challenges as opportunities for growth, both for him and for me. As Joshua entered preschool, we faced new hurdles. The school system was a maze of special education services, individualized education plans, IEPs, and meetings with specialists. I often felt overwhelmed by the paperwork and decisions that had to be made. One meeting in particular stands out in my memory. It was a discussion with Joshua's teachers and therapists about his progress. They were kind but honest, explaining that Joshua's developmental delays would likely impact his learning for many years to come. Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. I had been holding on to hope that maybe he would catch up, that maybe things would get easier. After that meeting, I felt disheartened. But later that evening, as I sat with my Bible, God led me to Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Those verses reminded me that I didn't have to understand everything. I just needed to trust God with Joshua's future. I began to shift my perspective. Instead of focusing on what Joshua couldn't do, I started celebrating his progress, no matter how small. Each step forward, each new word he learned, was a victory. God was teaching me patience, perseverance, and the beauty of trusting in his timing. There were still storms. Joshua faced health issues that required multiple surgeries, and each time we entered the hospital, fear would grip my heart. Watching him in pain was unbearable, and I often found myself asking God, why does he have to suffer? During one of those hospital stays, I opened my Bible and read from Isaiah 43:3-2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. Those words brought me comfort in a way nothing else could. I realized that while God didn't promise us a life free from pain, he did promise to walk with us through the storms, and he was walking with Joshua even in his suffering. It was during those moments of uncertainty that I leaned heavily on prayer. I prayed over Joshua's hospital bed, asking God for healing, for strength, and for peace. And each time, I felt his presence, steadying my heart and reminding me that we were never alone. Now, as Joshua enters elementary school, I look back at the years we've been through, and I see God's fingerprints all over our journey. Raising a child with special needs has stretched me, challenged me, and broken me in ways I never expected. But it has also deepened my faith in ways I never imagined. Joshua is a gift. His laughter, his curiosity, his unconditional love, all of it reflects God's grace. Yes, there are still tough days. There are moments of frustration and exhaustion, but through it all, I've come to understand what Paul meant in Romans 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God is working for our good, even when the path is hard to see. He is shaping both Joshua and me through every challenge, using our story to glorify his name. One of the biggest lessons I've learned on this journey is the importance of surrender. As a mother, it's so easy to want to control everything, to protect your child from pain, and to smooth out the rough edges of life. But I've come to realize that I can't control everything, and that's okay. God is sovereign, and his plans for Joshua are far greater than anything I could imagine. I'm reminded of Proverbs 16:9. In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. I may have plans for Joshua's future, but ultimately it is God who directs his path. And I've learned to trust that whatever that path may look like, God will be with us every step of the way. Today, Joshua is a vibrant, joyful child who continues to surprise us with his resilience and strength. He's taught me more about love, patience, and faith than I ever thought possible. Every day with him is a reminder of God's grace, a grace that has carried us through the valleys and lifted us to the mountaintops. I don't know what the future holds for Joshua. There will undoubtedly be more challenges ahead, but I no longer face them with fear. I face them with faith, knowing that the same God who has guided us this far will continue to lead us. As I look into Joshua's eyes, I see a reflection of God's love. I see his faithfulness, his goodness, and his power to turn even the most difficult circumstances into something beautiful. And I am grateful for the gift of my son, and grateful for the God who has walked with me every step of this journey. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. Joshua's future and mine are safe in his hands. Raising a child with special needs is not the journey I expected, but it is the journey that God has lovingly ordained for me. Through it, I've learned that faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting in the one who does. God has been my guide, my strength, and my comfort through every struggle. And as I continue to walk this path, I do so with hope, knowing that He will never leave us or forsake us. Through Joshua, I have witnessed firsthand the beauty of God's grace, and for that, I will forever be thankful.